Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has left migrants with very little room to move legally across borders. Now, this has given rise to movement facilitated by smugglers. Government needs to ensure that movement is made safe for migrants and not smugglers. That's the word from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. Lucia is a senior analyst from the organisation, joining us now to talk about what's been happening. Lucia, very good morning and thanks so much for your time. So give us an idea of what's been happening since the start of this pandemic, where we know that movement for migrants has been restricted. What have they resorted to and who's been benefiting from this?
Well, as you've noted, legal ways of migrating have been to a significant extent closed down during COVID. And those that still need to move are forced to do so irregularly. And it's key to remember that demand for movement is not always elastic. For example, in the context of refugees, many can't simply wait until it is legal to move again. So as states militarize borders and try and stop migration, it becomes very hard to move independently, and more migrants and refugees need help from smugglers. Further, this temporary lull in migration is likely to not only stop with migration resuming, but reverse with migration growing as COVID countermeasures are eased. Economic distress caused by COVID means that more people will need to migrate for work. And if legal options remain closed, there will be a spike in irregular migration, and smugglers will benefit. So we risk emerging from the pandemic into a landscape with a more profitable and stronger human smuggling industry.
So, Lucia, what have we seen happening? Have we seen many people turning to smugglers? And what is the outcome of that? I mean, just looking at, over the past couple of years, what we've noticed, especially with smuggling happening to Europe and the likes as well. We saw lots of deaths. We saw lots of them not making it to the other end. What have we noticed here?
We need to remember that smuggling isn't an inherently exploitative industry. However, when there is militarization of borders and states really try and stop migration, smugglers professionalize in order to deal with these risks, and they take riskier routes to evade detection. And as you've noted, we've seen many examples across Africa where we've seen a spike in the prices for smuggling services. For example, in Niger, between 2015 and 2019, they increased fivefold, and a spike in recorded deaths on migration journeys. We again have seen the prices for smuggling services increasing because the risk faced by smugglers increases, and unfortunately this increased price and increased risk is passed on to migrants.
So does this also open the door to human trafficking? I mean, where people think, yes, okay, I'm paying a little bit extra, someone's going to get me to where I'm going to go, but find themselves in an unimaginable position where they've become victims of something much more sinister?
So, firstly, it's key to remember that these human smuggling and human trafficking are discrete and different phenomena. So, human trafficking is the recruitment of a person through threats or deceit for the purpose of exploitation, and we commonly see this as labor or sexual exploitation. While with smuggling, it's helping a person unlawfully enter a country for benefit of the smuggler. But yes, as the migration landscape becomes more hostile and there is greater enforcement against smuggling, we've repeatedly seen that the smuggling industry becomes more exploitative. And there we see a greater blurring with trafficking as smugglers exploit the migrants for additional profit.
So what are we seeing? Let's just go to the root of the problem and why it is that migrants might have to go under the radar sometimes. What is it? What are the rules that are in place? What are the precautions or what's being done or not being done to make their lives a little easier and safer for them to be able to move elsewhere to better their lives and not leave them in the hands of criminals like smugglers?
Well, too often we are seeing that migration policies are being driven by xenophobia and often framed as a national security concern. Now, clearly the containment of COVID is very important, but it is at the same time very important not to vilify migrants and make them seem like the only carriers of contagion. So in order to diminish reliance on smugglers, it's extremely important to ensure that there remain legal avenues for migrating. And in terms of responding to smuggling industries that already exist, criminal justice responses and law enforcement should focus on the networks that are creating the most harm. So those that you noted that are more akin to trafficking dynamics where migrants are significantly exploited.
So this obviously would need some major policy changes in Lucia from what you're saying. We need, like you say, for governments to recognize the rights of migrants more. And I would like to know how we fare in Africa, within Africa, when it comes to opening our doors to our neighbors, and where are we missing it?
So obviously it's very difficult to generalize across the continent as a whole, and there is a significant difference between countries, as you can imagine. However, there is a long way to go to, for example, achieve the African Union's vision of entirely open borders, and many states are continuing to invest in border control. So the policy changes that we need are both in terms of how to counter smuggling as a criminal market and also how to respond to migration. And it's key to assess the labour market and demand and make sure that migration policies are helping meet those demands rather than merely closing down all possible ways of moving.
All right, thanks very much for that, Lucia Bird, just giving us an idea of just what's happening with migrants at the moment, falling into the hands of smugglers out of desperation.